Hello and welcome to our podcast on willpower and language learning. I'm David, and today I'm joined by my colleague Sarah, who specializes in language acquisition and cognitive psychology.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah, and I'm really excited to talk about how willpower impacts our ability to learn languages effectively. This is something I'm passionate about, both professionally and personally.
Sarah, I think many of our listeners are trying to learn a new language, but struggle with consistency. They start with enthusiasm, but often find their motivation fading after a few weeks. Why does this happen?
That's such a common experience, David. What people are experiencing is what psychologists call willpower depletion. Think of willpower as a muscle that gets tired when overused. When we try to learn a language through sheer force of will, we're setting ourselves up for failure because willpower is a finite resource.
That's fascinating. So we can actually run out of willpower during the day. Exactly.
Research shows that we have a limited supply of mental energy for self-control and decision-making each day. Every time you resist checking social media, choose to study instead of watching TV, or force yourself to practice vocabulary, you're drawing from this limited reserve.
I've definitely felt that mental fatigue at the end of a long day when all my good intentions to study just evaporate. But does that mean we're doomed to fail at learning languages?
Not at all. The trick isn't to rely on unlimited willpower. It's to use what we know about psychology to create systems that reduce the willpower needed. I think of it as willpower-efficient language learning.
Willpower-efficient language learning. I love that concept. What are some practical strategies our listeners could implement?
Let's start with habit stacking. This is where you attach your new language learning habit to an existing habit. For example, you might decide to practice vocabulary for 10 minutes right after brushing your teeth every morning.
That makes a lot of sense. By connecting it to something you already do automatically, you reduce the decision fatigue, right?
Precisely. Another strategy is environment design. Make your language learning materials highly visible and easily accessible. Keep your language app on your home screen, your textbook on your nightstand, or flashcards by your coffee maker.
I've heard about the 20-second rule. If you can reduce the time it takes to start a good habit by 20 seconds, you're much more likely to do it.
That's a perfect example. And conversely, add 20 seconds of friction to bad habits. If you're getting distracted by social media when you should be studying, put your phone in another room or use an app blocker.
Let's talk about consistency. Many language learners debate whether they should study for hours once a week or a few minutes every day. What does the research say?
The research is very clear on this one. Consistent, spaced practice beats cramming every time. 15 minutes daily is far more effective than 2 hours once a week. This is due to how our brains form and strengthen neural connections through spaced repetition.
That's reassuring for busy people. Now, I've been reading McGonagall's book on the willpower instinct, which suggests that willpower is like a muscle that can be strengthened over time. Does that apply to language learning?
Absolutely. McGonagall's research shows that small, consistent acts of self-control can build your overall willpower capacity. Starting with just 5 minutes of daily language practice builds not just language skills, but also your general ability to stick with challenging tasks.
Could you share some specific willpower exercises that could help our listeners with their language learning journey?
One of my favorites is the willpower breath. When you feel resistance to studying, take a deep breath for 5 counts, hold for 1, and exhale for 6 counts. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and helps overcome the initial reluctance to start.
That sounds simple yet powerful. Any others?
Try the just one technique. When you don't feel like studying, commit to just one thing. Reviewing just one vocabulary word, listening to just 1 minute of audio, or reading just one sentence. Often, this breaks the initial resistance and you'll continue beyond that minimum.
And I think many of us can relate to how starting is often the hardest part. Let's shift gears a bit. You mentioned earlier about creating systems rather than relying on willpower. Could you elaborate on that?
Think about it this way. Willpower is for amateurs. Systems are for professionals. A system might be setting a specific time and place for language study that becomes non-negotiable, like brushing your teeth. Or it could be joining a language exchange community where you're expected to participate weekly.
So it's about removing the decision-making element as much as possible.
Exactly. Every decision depletes willpower. By creating systems, you're essentially making decisions in advance. Another powerful system is using implementation intentions. These are specific if-then plans, like if it's 7:30 a.m., then I'm spending 15 minutes on Duolingo.
That reminds me of James Clear's book on atomic habits, where he talks about making habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. How can language learners apply these principles?
Clear's framework is perfect for language learning. To make it obvious, you could place your language materials where you'll see them. To make it attractive, find content you genuinely enjoy in the target language. Maybe podcasts or YouTube videos on topics you're passionate about.
And I suppose to make it easy, you could break down your practice into tiny, manageable chunks.
Absolutely. 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes. And to make it satisfying, track your progress with a habit tracker or celebrate small wins. Maybe after a week of daily practice, you reward yourself with a coffee from your favorite cafe.
Let's talk about motivation. Many language learners start with high motivation, but struggle to maintain it. How can understanding willpower help with this?
Motivation is actually downstream from action, not the other way around. We think we need motivation to act, but often taking action is what creates motivation. Start with tiny actions and motivation often follows.
That's counterintuitive, but makes sense. Do social factors play a role in maintaining willpower for language learning?
Hugely. Social accountability is one of the most powerful forces for sustaining habits. Finding a language learning partner or joining a community can dramatically increase your consistency because you're not just relying on your own willpower anymore.
I've definitely found that to be true. When I was learning Spanish, joining a weekly conversation group was a game changer for me. What about the role of identity in language learning persistence?
That's such an important point, David. The most powerful change happens at the identity level. When you shift from I'm trying to learn French to I am someone who speaks French daily, your behaviors naturally align with that identity. It becomes less about willpower and more about being consistent with who you see yourself as.
That's profound. So it's less, I should study today, and more, this is who I am.
Exactly. And this connects to why many polyglots, people who speak multiple languages, find it relatively easy to learn additional languages. It's already part of their identity.
Let's talk about failure, which is inevitable in any learning process. How can we use what we know about willpower to bounce back from setbacks?
The research here is fascinating. Self-compassion is actually more effective than self-criticism for maintaining willpower. If you miss a day of practice, harsh self-criticism depletes willpower further, while self-compassion preserves it.
So, beating yourself up about missing your language practice actually makes it harder to get back on track?
Precisely. Instead, treat yourself with the kindness you'd offer a friend. I missed a day. That's okay. Everyone has off days. What small step can I take right now to get back on track?
As we start wrapping up, could you summarize the key takeaways about willpower and language learning?
First, recognize that willpower is limited, so create systems that reduce your reliance on it. Second, consistency trumps intensity. Small daily efforts compound dramatically over time. Third, use habit stacking and environment design to make language learning the path of least resistance. Fourth, build social accountability through language partners or communities. And finally, practice self-compassion when you inevitably face setbacks.
Those are such valuable insights, Sarah. Any final practical tip you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes. Start incredibly small, even ridiculously small. Commit to just 1 minute of language learning daily for the next week. Once that becomes automatic, then gradually increase. Remember, the goal isn't to become fluent overnight. It's to build a sustainable practice that will carry you to fluency over time.
Thank you so much for sharing these insights today, Sarah. I think our listeners now have some powerful strategies for using willpower more effectively in their language learning journeys.
It was my pleasure, David. And to all the language learners listening, remember that every expert was once a beginner. The difference between success and failure often isn't talent or intelligence, but rather creating systems that make consistency possible.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you all for listening to our podcast on willpower and language learning. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more content on language learning strategies and self-improvement concepts. Until next time, happy learning.